Someone you love is gone, not dead, just gone. They were there yesterday and now there is a space where they used to be and your brain cannot stop returning to that space the way your tongue returns to a missing tooth. You cannot eat properly, you cannot sleep properly. You keep thinking you hear their voice in the next room. Your chest feels like something physical is wrong with it because something physical actually is wrong with it. And you are doing all of this alone, in your apartment, with your phone, wondering why it feels this bad. Here is what nobody tells you about heartbreak. It is not a metaphor. It is not an emotional response dressed up in physical language. It is a genuine biological crisis that your ancient nervous system was specifically designed to treat in a way that modern life has made almost entirely impossible. And the gap between how your body expects to grieve and how modern life actually lets you grieve is one of the most quietly damaging mismatches in human experience today. Let's start with the biology because the biology is what makes everything else make sense. In 2011, researcher Edward Smith at Columbia University conducted a study that changed how neuroscientists think about social pain. He recruited people who had experienced an unwanted romantic breakup within the past 6 months and placed them inside a brain scanning machine. He then showed them photographs of their former partners. The brain regions that activated were not the emotional processing centers researchers expected. They were the same regions that activate during physical pain. Not similar regions, not adjacent regions, the same ones. Your brain processes the loss of a bonded partner using the identical neural architecture it uses to process being burned or cut or hit. Heartbreak is not like pain, it is pain, processed through exactly the same system. And the reason for this goes back a very long way. For the vast majority of human evolutionary history, losing a bonded partner was not just emotionally devastating, it was a practical survival emergency. In a hunter-gatherer band of 20 to 50 people, your partner was not just someone you loved. They were your primary resource-sharing alliance, your co-parent, your hunting or gathering partner. The person whose specific skills complemented yours in ways that made both of you more likely to survive than either of you would be alone. Losing that bond was functionally similar to losing a limb. The pain response existing at all makes complete evolutionary sense. A species that didn't feel the loss of a survival partnership deeply enough to fight to repair it would not have maintained the pair bonds that made cooperative child-rearing possible. The pain is the mechanism. It exists to make sure you take the loss seriously. But here is where it gets more interesting. Your brain doesn't just process heartbreak as pain, it processes it as withdrawal. Anthropologist Helen Fisher spent decades studying the neuroscience of romantic love and found that the early stages of falling in love activate the same dopamine reward pathways as cocaine, the same circuits, the same neurochemical cascade. Which means that losing a partner doesn't just hurt the way a wound hurts, it hurts the way addiction withdrawal hurts. Your brain built a chemical dependency on the presence of another person and is now crashing from the sudden removal of its supply. The obsessive thoughts, the inability to concentrate, the physical restlessness, the constant returning to memories. These are not signs of weakness. They are textbook withdrawal symptoms running through neurological hardware that is hundreds of thousands of years old. Ancient humans could not have told you any of this. They had no neuroscience, no dopamine, no reward pathway. But they had something modern humans have almost entirely lost. They had a social structure specifically built to survive it with you. In a hunter-gatherer group, grief of any kind was never a private experience. It could not be. The group was too small, too interdependent, and too aware of each individual's psychological state for any significant emotional crisis to go unaddressed. When someone lost a partner, the entire group responded, not with advice, not with a casserole left at the door, with physical presence. Continuous, sustained, uninterrupted physical proximity from people who knew you completely and needed you to recover. Research on contemporary hunter-gatherer groups gives us a window into what this looked like. Among the Kung San people of the Kalahari, grief periods involve the community actively reorganizing around the grieving individual. Sleep arrangements change so the person is never alone at night. Daily tasks are redistributed so the grieving person is always working alongside others rather than in isolation. Food is specifically prepared and brought rather than the person being expected to provide for themselves. The entire social architecture bends toward one goal, making sure the person whose bond was broken is immediately re-embedded in a dense web of alternative attachment. And this matters more than it sounds because of something called the social baseline theory, developed by psychologist James Cone at the University of Virginia. Cone's research found that the human nervous system doesn't just prefer social connection, it treats it as the default operating condition. When you are with trusted others, your brain literally does less work to regulate threat responses, conserve energy, and manage pain. Social connection isn't a comfort on top of survival. It is factored into the baseline calculation of how much energy threat management requires. Isolation doesn't just feel worse during heartbreak. It physiologically makes the pain harder to process because you are running a system that evolved for collective regulation on a setting it was never designed for. The ancient answer to heartbreak was never give it time, it was give it people. Specifically the same people every day close enough to touch for as long as it took. Modern heartbreak looks almost nothing like this. You go home to an apartment, you close the door, you text 3 people, maybe you see a friend on the weekend. The gap between what your nervous system is asking for and what modern social architecture actually provides is not a small one. It is the difference between a species-appropriate response to a biological crisis and a genuinely inadequate substitute that leaves the underlying system running in a state it was never designed to sustain alone. Nobody is suggesting you move back into a communal cave. Modern life is not going anywhere. But the next time heartbreak feels unbearable and you cannot understand why something emotional is producing something this physical, remember that your brain is not being dramatic. It is running a program that was written for a world where the people who loved you would have been sitting next to you already. They just forgot to come over.